Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Unstoppable podcast. I'm your host, Diana Chen, and I am here today with two very special guests. I've got Patrick and Graeme from Mirror, the decentralized content platform that I'm sure all of you have heard about, if not participated in the right race and contributed to. So, welcome so much, Patrick and Graeme. I'm so happy to have you guys here today.
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So before we dive into Mirror, which I've got a million questions for you guys about Mirror, but I'd love for the listeners to hear a little bit more about your backgrounds, who each of you are. So Patrick, do you want to get us started and just tell us a little about your crypto journey? When did you first hear about it? What was it that piqued your interest and how did you get from there to here?
Yeah, definitely. So I started out of school at Instacart as a software engineer. That was a lot of fun. First time working on an actual production code base. But then after 3 to 6 months, every project pretty much looked the same. And so I was trying to figure out what to do next. And then randomly one day got an email from somebody from this company called Dharma. And they said they were starting a growth engineering team. And they said that my past experience is something they needed. And turns out that Graham was actually one of the people that he was my hiring manager. And my first interview was with Graham. And I still remember we did a little, I don't think we did a coding challenge, but he was basically I was trying to ask him because I wasn't super deep into crypto. I was one of those people who was 2012, 2013, got hacked by Mt. Gox and all that, lost your private keys 3 times. I still was pretty new to it. And Graham was explaining, I was like, okay, what are you guys trying to do? And at that time they were trying to be a crypto native bank. And then just the way he was talking about it was people were not talking about other products that I had seen in that way, where it's oh, we're going to do this global permissionless system. It's the future of the internet, technology, finance. And yeah, just seeing his excitement, I was just oh, wow, this is pretty interesting. And worst case, I went through more interviews and was like, okay, I don't know if this company is going to, I don't know what's going to happen with them, but the people here are really smart. And so worst case, yeah, I just worked with really smart people for a few years and then, yeah, figured out from there. And so that's kind of how it got started.
Nice, nice. All right, and Graham, what about you? So you got into the space, I'm assuming before Patrick did, since you were his boss for a little bit. What's your story like?
Yeah, so I actually worked a little bit at a hedge fund that had a cryptocurrency called Numerai that was founded by a friend of mine from high school, actually, Richard Crabe. And he already got me into it, and that gave a lot of legitimacy to crypto. The fact that he was kind of betting his company on it. Um, and then, after that, I went to Dharma. The Dell Hollander just graduated already at that time and had these crazy plans for building lending and borrowing on chain. So I did that for, three years or so, before Mirror. So.
Nice. Okay, so then you're both working at Dharma, and then where did the idea for Mirror come from, and how did that get started?
Yeah, so I was working on this NFT metaverse idea on Arweave, kind of far out there. I was really into the idea of gaming platforms on blockchains, and I thought Arweave was very interesting as a novel storage platform. And Dennis Nazarov, who isn't here, but Dennis was working on Feedweave, which was Twitter on Arweave. So we were kind of working on very similar things, and he was raising at the time to build out a publishing platform on Arweave. And I really wanted to do NFT gaming, but also I really wanted to do Kickstarter on Ethereum. So I had these two ideas that were conflicting, but very much in thinking along the same lines as Dennis. And so yeah, we ended up sort of joining forces instead of doing separate projects. But he had already raised the seed at that point, so things were already sort of kicked off. Yeah, and that's sort of the founding story. We met on Twitter, and we didn't actually meet up in person for months. So we were building this whole thing without really knowing each other personally, which is cool.
Yeah, I mean that's pretty much the way you meet people these days, right? Is every founding story is going to start with, yeah, we met on Twitter or we met on Discord, we met on Telegram, and didn't see each other in person until months later.
It's funny because Kayvon Turanian had actually introed us via email months and months before, maybe a year before that, because even then we were both interested in Arweave, and we were everyone's sleeping on this platform, and he made the intro, but we didn't actually do a call until we were both really working on the same thing. And then I think Sam Williams from Arweave actually pushed to get us to talk. So fascinating.
Gotcha. Yeah. So, okay. So Mirror, it's a decentralized content platform. So then where did this idea come from? Like, obviously you guys identified some sort of problem or gap in the system that we have today in the Web 2 world and decided to solve it with Mirror. Explain like that thought process to me.
Yeah, I mean, so this is a lot of like Dennis's thinking at the time. There's a lot of platform risk with the traditional like publishing platforms, and it seemed quite obvious that somebody should build something on top of Filecoin or Arweave or one of these decentralized publishing platforms, and then you can create like gateways on top of that, and that there's a very like straightforward like story around that. But then I think the other thing that's interesting is not just this unstoppable storage or like publishing platform, but how do you integrate that with Web3? Because we have all of these amazing tools. And I think it was something that like intuitively to us, we didn't think like the power of DeFi was necessarily going to make its like mainstream adoption in the form of like a fintech bank necessarily, which is kind of what I was working on at Dharma, but it might actually have these more interesting applications, for creators and for, like a writer basically like crowdfunding their projects or, doing like NFTs of their work, something like that. And like weirder ideas like that come through, that sort of like emerge out of using these or like integrating these different technologies. So I think that's like something that we were interested in, probably more than the idea of just like an unstoppable publishing platform, which is, a much simpler kind of thing to do, I think.
Yeah, for sure. So, one crazy thing to me is that Mirror's only been around for about 6 months or so, which it seems like you've been around for far longer than that. Walk me through like the how Mirror has developed as a platform and how it's grown and how you've been able to grow it so quickly. Like, just take us back to like the original days of Mirror and then how it's evolved till today.
Yeah, so we have this like this great like blog post called the MVP before Christmas that like has really details the story. But we started working on like the publishing platform really like around like December 10th or something like that. And we had the first person who wanted to use it, which was Trent. He wanted to make this publication called Stateless, and he wanted it by the new year or something. So we made this like arbitrary deadline. And there was all these things to work out, like publishing into Arweave for one, but just that the whole like sign up process, like how does somebody like log in? Do we use Web3 with like something like MetaMask for sign in? How do keys work? Do you sign with your Ethereum address? If so, then you have to sign every time you do anything on the platform. That's kind of tedious. So thinking through the cryptography, we ended up actually using different signing keys, which we stored in the browser, so it allows you to like automatically sign things without actually explicitly signing it through something like MetaMask. Thinking through all these things, there was like a lot of complexity, and then we just like rushed to kind of get it done by Christmas, which was very stressful. A lot of like late nights, but we ended up kind of doing it. But that set the pace, right? Because once we had like achieved that, we didn't really want to slow down, so we ended up continuing with that kind of momentum, and that led to the original like decisions of, okay, now we have this publishing platform and it's token gated, so you need a token to get into it, which creates like Sybil resistance. A Sybil attack is basically people counterfeiting their identity to create multiple accounts on the website to maybe just domain squat or something like that. So we token gated it, but then we didn't want to issue tokens and just give it to people. And so we came up with the right race, which is actually kind of like one of the ways that it became very popular because people could see a list of candidates and then vote for them. And that was kind of fun. It was like a staking game. And that was pretty cool. So I think there were 17 people that were originally let into the platform before we made the decision to make it a race with voting. But those were like the early days, and that's kind of what like set us up.
Yeah, I remember like back in December, like Graham and I chatted and said I was in Tulum for a bit. And then I was like, yeah, what is, he said that he was at Mirror. I was like, oh, that's interesting. What is it? And then he was like, oh, we're still trying to figure it out because this was even before, yeah, they shipped that first MVP. And then we're still trying to figure it out. He's like, it's kind of like crypto Substack. And I was like, oh, okay. It's like, that's interesting. He was like, yeah, but we're still figuring stuff out. And I was like, oh, that seems interesting, but is it just like Substack with like crypto payments? And it's like, I already went through that at Dharma where it's like, oh, you just like, I think it's a bit too early for like Venmo just works pretty well. And so even though in the long term, I think that crypto is going to be used for like peer-to-peer transfers, but then so I was like, yeah, I kind of put it in the back of my mind, just kind of explored other ideas. Then a few months later, ended up seeing the thing that put them on the map for me was the tokenized crowdfund with John Palmer. It was the SA token. And at that point, I was like, oh, this isn't just like payments with crypto. This is a new way of financing projects. This is a new way of sharing revenue and monetization strategy, not just a subscription. Like you have ownership in this. And it was still like iterated a bunch from that. And then the next few months really was all around like shipping individual experiments around our economic tools. And it's like internally we view ourselves less as like a publishing platform, more as like an economic protocol. And so examples are the crowdfunding, there's the auctions, there's NFT editions, there's splits, and then ideally we're going to add more over time. And so yeah, this first phase has been around just iterating, experimenting with different economic tools. And now this next phase we're going into is like, how do we build a unified protocol? How do we build a scalable way to onboard people? How do we give people, community members, like ownership in this protocol as well?
Yeah, I want to dive into a lot of that a little bit more. Patrick, since you just brought up all of the different features, can you dive a little deeper into each of those features, like the crowd funds, the auctions, the splits, all of that, especially for people who aren't on the platform yet and maybe haven't had a chance to take a look at it? Like, can you explain how each of those features work and help people understand how this is different from, because I've heard a lot of people, you know, like you said, compare it to like a decentralized Substack or a decentralized Medium. And I just want you to explain to people why it's different from that.
Yeah. And so a lot of people talk about the creator economy. And yeah, to me, creator autonomy means that the next like small to medium sized businesses are going to be these individual creators or these small teams or these small communities. And so Mirror is basically building the crypto tools to enable that, enable creators and communities to have their own small, medium, or very large business. And so if you think about a business, you have a bundle of different tools and services. So one of them is financing, raising money. Second one is monetization, a way to make money. A third one, especially in crypto, is governance. Like once you have all this cash flow on chain in a treasury, how do you decide how to spend it? How do you make decisions on who to hire, who to onboard? And so like, there's really a bundle of those three main things, like financing, monetization, and governance. And so all the tools fit into one of those categories. And so crowdfunding, that's for financing for a project, for raising money. And then in terms of monetization, that's NFT additions. And then there's also NFT auctions. And so the auctions, you have like one NFT and you can set a countdown or like a duration for the auction. And then also set a minimum price. And then when someone bids that minimum price, kicks off the auction. And so people have probably seen that if they've explored different NFT marketplaces. And so other one is NFT additions where you set a fixed price and then a fixed quantity and then people buy them. And then another one in terms of monetization is splits. So that's a way to, it's kind of like a tip jar, but also a way to share revenue on NFTs. We've seen people use that as a way to like trustlessly like donate to different causes that they care about. And so we've seen a lot of donations go to Gitcoin, Mint Fund, et cetera. And then lastly, in the area of governance, that's one that we're still thinking through. And yeah, Graeme, he's like the big brain behind the smart contracts, thinking through that, the implementations, how to make it like super gas efficient, and governance is a thing. So yeah, and like be good to get Graeme's thoughts on the governance part and how we're thinking about that.
Love to hear your thoughts on that, Graeme.
Well, yeah, I mean, the context is like we just came off of like a really intense sprint. Like I'm actually exhausted. Like we did like 14 days of just very very intense work in the sprint to basically unify all of these tools. So like it sounds like we have a lot of things, right? We have splits and crowdfunds and additions, all that you just heard. How do we unify this? Like how does this become a protocol? How is this the mirror protocol? Is it just a bunch of libraries that we've researched and developed, and like everyone's just gonna kind of take it and unbundle it somewhere? And basically, like the idea is that we want to create like a community of value where everyone is kind of unified and working together to like make something bigger, greater than the sum of the parts. And that's really like what a DAO is, or a community is. And the way to do that, I think, is to build tools, to have a treasury that takes a fee on the usage of these tools, and then to distribute ownership and governance of that treasury. I think that's, broadly speaking, that's what we're practicing in the space right now. Every protocol is basically just practicing this. Like how do we do this? how do we create value, create a set of tools, create communities, and then like decentralize ownership of it so that it doesn't end up, just enriching like a very few number of people, in the way that Web 2 companies did. So that's kind of the goal. And I just view us as just like building this muscle in the community right now, of like, creating these things and decentralizing them. And that's kind of the process. And so, the last like couple of days, what we've basically done is deployed a treasury, linked some of our tools to it, allowed people to specify how much they want to pay in terms of the fee to that treasury. And then that treasury actually will distribute ownership to the end user, which is claimable if they are a member of the Mirror community. If they've gone through the right race, which is kind of a know your community KYC process, they get voted in, or they get a right token sent from someone else, and then they can sort of claim ownership over the treasury. And of course, there's a lot to go into, like, in further detail. Like, how do you do governance through that process? We've just seen today Uniswap like have quite a bad situation. Like Vitalik wrote about this week as well. Governance through coin ownership is not necessarily the best thing, and so we're going to have to figure that out. But for now, it's like, the thing we're practicing is decentralizing ownership over this, and so we have some cool ideas, but we haven't really announced them.
For sure. And for reference, we're recording this on August 19th. So like the stuff that Graeme is talking about with Uniswap and stuff, that's just for reference. It's going to come out later. So people are going to be like, what is he talking about? Okay, cool. So I want to talk about the right race. You brought that up a few times. And this is something that has been like on every Wednesday on crypto Twitter. That's like all you see in the news feed is everybody entering right race. And that's also when I get all these like tags and DMs, and my notifications just like don't work for me anymore. But the right race is actually, I think, like one of the most fun and engaging ways of onboarding that I've seen out of any Web3 project. And I think a lot of people would echo that sentiment. I think like the one sort of like criticism that it's gotten is that it's sort of turned into, some people view that it's turned into more or less a popularity contest, where if you just know the right people, then you can get enough votes to get on the platform, and it's getting more and more competitive. So, like when I joined Mirror, it was like back when it just, every week I would just like get some more votes, and it took me quite a few weeks to get on. But nowadays it's like, if you know the right people, you just know like 6 or 7 of the right people, they throw you, all of their votes and you're in. And that's all it takes. But if you don't know the right people, that's like a lot of votes to accumulate in order to get in. So you guys actually just launched a new, I guess like not replacement for, but like in addition to the right race, this airdrop. Can you explain what that is, and like the thought process for why this was created on top of the right race?
Yeah, well, I want to say, first of all, like the right race was not intended as a growth hack. It was intended as a way to not have the team decide who gets in. But then we didn't really, I think in some ways, we launched it as an MVP and people really liked it, and then it grew faster than we were able to scale it. And so it ended up being this thing where people really enjoyed it, but it was like, it was sort of artificially, it was like too slow for people in a way. And so what we wanted to do was expand it, but I think that the popularity contest criticism is sort of correct. So the trick is to say, like, how can we actually be more sophisticated about this and actually like expand the network in a more thoughtful way? And while we were thinking about this, Andrew Hong, who's the data scientist at who's working at Consensus, he did some network analysis on Mirror, just sort of trying to figure out like how centralized those relationships really are, and express that criticism with data. And that was really great. So we engaged him, and I said, well, why don't you come up with a proposal for us to actually do like an airdrop that can relieve some of this like centralization that's happening. And he did that, and I worked with him, for a couple of iterations over the course of like a month, a little bit over a month, on basically an algorithm where we could say if you've interacted with the protocol by buying something, or if you are voted in the right race, if you've voted multiple times, you can sort of get a score of like how much you're contributing, how much you care about this community. And then we can weight that by sort of a betweenness metric, which is going to measure like how tightly knit you are to the current like community that exists. And if we can find bridges to other communities, that would be really great. So if we could find somebody who has like a community maybe in Asia, which is like, like not a lot of our current users, most of our users are kind of like American centric. We can bridge to like new communities through that person. And so it would be good to give them more tokens because they can like then distribute it out themselves. And that was this week's experiment. So we did the drop, I think, but yesterday, yesterday morning, we did an airdrop of 302 tokens that are sort of like very strategically allocated to people who have like different networks but also care about Mirror. So that's like one experiment, and we'll just learn from that and keep going. And I think we'll eventually get something that's interesting and good.
Yeah, and then I'm curious to hear too, like what, if you're able to share, what was the strategy that went into like deciding how much mirror each person got airdropped?
Yeah, so we did many iterations. It's all algorithmic. We did not decide, per person what anyone should get. What we did is we try to just be principled about saying we want to reward people who are participating in the community. We want more of that. That's great. Like, so for example, if you do the right race every week and you're voting, it would be sort of a travesty of justice if you didn't get any right tokens dropped, right? That would be terrible. So at a minimum, we want to reward that kind of behavior, like reward, but you know what I mean? Like just honor those people's inherent interest in the platform. And then we want to amplify people who might like bring more diversity to the platform, because diversity is actually extremely important to Mirror for many reasons. And the right race has been pretty good about diversity, I think, looking at what we have, but we still have the centralization in terms of like who knows whom in these like networks. So we want to branch out to different networks, and so that's basically, we just amplified certain people in that sense.
Yeah, for sure. Another thing I wanted to ask you guys about is you've done a fantastic job of building this community of people who are on Mirror or just obsessed with Mirror and entering Right Race. I mean, I know people who are like, I can't write for my life, but like they participate in the Right Race every week. They're super involved. How have you been able to build up such a strong community, especially in such a short period of time?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it's the nature of crypto in general. I think multiple things. One of them is just a crypto community. It feels like in some respects, like within the Ethereum community, it feels like we're all in this together and we're rooting for each other. There's positive sum mentality. And then I think that's like on a macro level. And then specifically with Mirror, yeah, I think that it's fairly, I think what we're doing is like with the creator economy and all that, it's, the experiments that we're running, they're a lot of fun. And I think, frankly, a lot of, like Packy wrote about this recently, where it's like a lot of it's around status, and it's like being on Mirror and like getting into the right race. And yeah, definitely that's like an inherent human thing. And so I also think that, yeah, people wanting to get in, we've also noticed that, yeah, not everybody that gets in through right race, to your point, people are like, hey, I don't plan on writing, I don't want to write, I just want to be seen, I just want to be at the top there, I just want to get a bunch of votes so that I can vote my squad in. And so I think, frankly, that's another part of it as well. But yeah, we view that as, in many ways, that's the on-ramp. That's the way to get people interested, downloading MetaMask, interacting with it, setting up their publication. And then now it's up to us to build more of these like recurring use cases. That's really just like getting people into the door, opening the door, showing them the house, and then walk in. And then now we got to make sure, yeah, build engaging experiences, recurring things that they're using the platform, they're building businesses, they're building communities, they're having a good time, and they're using it frequently. And that's kind of our next phase and what we're trying to do.
Yeah, so speaking of that, I'd be curious to hear, from both of you, like what are some of the coolest projects or uses of Mirror that you've seen so far, whether by individuals or companies or anything? Because I've really seen a spectrum, and I think, for people who aren't familiar with it, it'll help to hear some examples of how people or projects have been using Mirror to, help them understand the full scale of what's possible there.
I think in general, there's like this new customer, there's this new like persona of customer with crypto and their DAOs. And there's like a whole spectrum of what the definition of a DAO is. It could be like a massive DeFi protocol with billions of dollars in their treasury, or it could just be a Telegram group with a multi-sig and just some funds that they're and NFTs that they're collecting. But I think at Mirror specifically, one that we've seen that I'm really impressed with is called Songcamp, and they're a music DAO, and they're a bunch of musicians that they've tried to get record deals or they've been on Spotify and gotten hundreds of thousands of plays or millions of plays, only to get like $100 or $1,000 for this hit song that went viral. And so they're experimenting. Okay, what are new ways of collaboratively creating music, and then also new ways of collaboratively earning revenue and getting paid directly for music. And so they ran an experiment with the crowd fund, and then that turned into doing these different camps. And right now they have a themed camp called Electra, and then they raise money through a crowd fund. And then not only did people end up getting these fungible ERC20 tokens, they also got these NFTs, and so they got both. And then the ERC20 tokens gave them access to a Discord server. And then in the Discord, they're doing this like crazy game where they have to like unlock all these puzzles and figure out these riddles, and you work on it with people. And it's like this new way of working with people and collaborating and just like building community online. And then so that's a benefit from like people contributing and being part of the community. But then for the artists, they're making $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 every time they drop a series of NFTs. I know that this week they had 3 party bids bid on their 3 NFTs, and in total it was like $50,000, and that's for like 20 artists. And so there's probably some overhead costs, but each of them probably walking away with a few $1,000s. And so being able to see and thinking about, okay, how do we have the next 10 Electras? How do we have the next 100, next 1,000 Electras across different categories?
Very cool. What about you, Graeme?
Yeah, I think we have to talk about PartyBit, Party DAO. So internally, we were talking a lot about variations on our crowdfunding, and one thing that Dennis was really into was this idea of crowdfunding a bid on an NFT. So like if you could have a foundation sale auction that was going on, like how could we use our crowdfunding contract to basically like bid on that NFT. And he tweeted about it and got into a conversation with somebody from Paradigm, and they were going back and forth in it, and it seemed like it had some promise. And so he crowdfunded it on his blog, d.mirror.xyz. And that crowdfund ended up being backed by a whole bunch of people who were actually developers and designers and stuff. And we didn't know that, in the beginning, but it was like, there was somebody from 0x, there was Anna Carroll who worked with us at Dharma, and she was smart contract developer. There was designer from Uniswap, Khalil, and a bunch of other people as well. And they all got into a Discord at the end of the crowdfund, and they all had these like party tokens that allowed them to create a Discord that was token gated. And they started discussing like what we can do with this. And John Palmer became sort of like the lead PM on the project and assigned some roles. I had a role for looking over the smart contracts, and then Anna was going to write them. And then Anish, who's at Paradigm 2 now, he did the front end. And they built a product together. And I think that that's like what a DAO is. And I think that that's like the promise of these tokens, right? It's like you can create a token around an idea with a narrative, spelled out in this blog post. And then the community around it can go and build something. And that can turn into $1 billion like idea. And then you can go and like, decentralize it with community, because, you have these tokens so easy to sort of algorithmically pass around. And that's kind of amazing and beautiful. And I hope it works out exactly like that. Because it's a wonderful story. Yeah. And I think that's exactly the kind of thing that we wanted to do with Mira, starting on day one. Like it's kind of like ideal.
Yeah, PartyBit and Party DAO, that's been like super fun to watch how that's developed. It has, that's definitely a really good example of a big success story out there, and super cool that they did that with Mirror. But yeah, I love all the projects. I love seeing all the projects that get funded on Mirror and launched on Mirror, because it just goes to show that Mirror is so much more than just a publishing platform. It's not just for bloggers that want to write stuff, but also like for the individual content creator too. I have seen people be able to write, really thoughtful pieces and mint them as NFTs and sell them, or get people to tip them for it. And I think that's that is also like a really good example of what we're going to see more of in Web3, with just content creators being able to monetize their content a lot better than they have been able to in Web 2.
Yeah, I think in the short term, definitely is a little tricky. And one of my favorite quotes is like, yeah, the next big thing is going to start looking like a toy by Chris Dixon. And it kind of seems like that. It's just like really nerdy, technical people on the fringe are using it and think it's cool just because it's novel. And that's how most things start, whether it's the internet, whether it's computers, whether it's mobile phones, etc. And so I think we're at a similar stage now, and it's tough with gas fees. Like, definitely think you have to pay fees to convert from fiat into ETH. You have to pay gas fees every time you buy something or you transfer things. And so, yeah, definitely in the short term, there's some challenges, but I think in the medium term, like next few months, there's gonna be a lot of interesting stuff where, yeah, you're gonna start seeing, like crypto native social experiences and social apps where like favorites end up being some sort of NFT, and badges and likes and subscribers are this token they're able to display, where you're able to earn value from, and different things like that.
Yeah, for sure. And speaking of the future, like what is the future for Mir, both in the short term and in the long term?
Well, I kind of like this new like token distribution thing that we have going on. I think that's novel, and it's going to justify, I think, like the right race, and sort of like the Sybil resistance factor like quite a lot, because I think it gives us a superpower to be able to do grants a little bit better in the community, to kind of understand that our community like doesn't have whales in it. It's very much like one token per person at this point. And we can do things like a UBI drip, which is something we're experimenting with, and all this stuff is like running in production at the moment on mainnet, and we'll announce that like pretty soon. So I'm excited about that. But then there are all these other things too. I mean, we really want to lean into what Patrick was talking about with these DAOs, these like creator or media DAOs, and giving them new tools to build a Web3 media company. I think that's like a huge opportunity, and I hope we can serve. And I hope it'll be, like a lot better to build it on Mirror than to try and do it, separately, because you'll be part of this community that's very supportive. And then I think, technically, like moving to L2s, something we think about like all the time, and I'm always like researching that, and we're always like very close to like making a move, but it's still like not ready yet for us to do. But I think that that solves the problem that Patrick was talking about with the gas fees just being really high to do tipping or something like that. It's hard to do.
Yeah, 100%. And we got a bunch of questions from Twitter actually when I announced that I was going to be bringing you guys on the podcast. So I'm going to pull a few of those, lots of really thoughtful questions. The first one I've got here is, what was the most formative past crypto and non-crypto experience that heavily contributes to their vision of Mir today? And maybe each of you can share, like personally, if you have some personal experiences, or collectively, since you work together at Dharma.
Yeah, I can go quick. I did like tweet about this actually. So I was at this company that really its mission was to distribute college scholarships to students. And we partnered with over 300 colleges in the United States and did billions of dollars of college scholarships. And that was so important to me, because I just really thought that education tech and making sure that people could get into college was I just thought that was really important at the time. And but the problem was that it wasn't like native internet money. It was like a promise for a college to go and fulfill on their end. And when I discovered Ethereum through Richard at Numerai, it was just so clear that this is going to solve a lot of problems, and it was just going to be a much better experience. So it was through that I got it. It just clicked for me. It was like we were building these things we called scholarship evaluation engines, which is basically a smart contract to evaluate like whether you should get a scholarship or not. But it was all just like in like Ruby code, and it wasn't real. It was kind of a prototype. And I was just thinking the whole time, once I knew about it, that I could just write these contracts in Solidity and it would be real and guaranteed, and we wouldn't have to worry about anything falling through the cracks in terms of like the agreements with colleges or anything like that. So that was really formative. And then I worked at Numerai just a little bit, and they were doing this thing with like token staking, where you could basically, stake on something that you believe in, and then if you are wrong, like the token gets burned, and if you're right, you get some interest. And that was sort of like an interesting piece, and that informs, I think, like right race is basically like a staking mechanism. That's like basically where the idea comes from. Can you like vote on somebody and then participate in their success? And then Dharma doing DeFi, I think was critical. Just and going through the bear market and kind of like understanding how the cycles work, I think was quite very like formative too.
Yeah. What about you, Patrick?
We're in a super cycle. But yeah, for me, probably, so I was, like I said earlier, I was at Instacart before Dharma. And like one of my first few months there, it was like we got an email. It was either an email or during an all hands. And they said, oh, tomorrow or like next week, we're going to have shoppers doing a protest in front of the building. And they're all going to be, they're upset because they're not getting paid the amount they think they should be paid, or it's changing underneath them. And yeah, and they're upset with, yeah, with Instacart, the marketplace. And at the moment, I was just like, oh, this is crazy. It's like there's, and then we had someone present internally, a product manager, and she said, look at the data. This is like a small cohort of all the shoppers. Like in aggregate, people are making more. But that always stuck with me in terms of like the tension between like a marketplace and the participants. And it's like at first, that you maybe have seen with Ubers, like at first it's okay, it's gonna be really cheap rides. They're subsidizing, they're just trying to grow. They're trying to increase the number of drivers and then also the number of riders, because then that just creates a positive feedback loop. And so, but then at some point, you end up needing to, whether you go public or something else happens, and you need to start charging more, increase prices, improve your margin, make more money, and not be burning as much cash. And so at that point, there is this like fundamental tension between, you know, the network participants and then the network owners and the controllers. And yeah, that's seeing that up close and seeing the shoppers, and not really, they could, in theory, they could go find another job, but it'd be much nicer if, yeah, they owned equity in the underlying platform and underlying system, and were able to make decisions, were able to take all the code and create their own version of it and compete based off of market mechanisms and not just a monopoly or other things as well, just access to capital. And so, yeah, over time, that definitely has stuck with me.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Another question is, the the person said a mirror-like product has been screaming to exist since the beginning of Ethereum. Why, in their opinion, did it happen now and not 2 years ago or 2 years from now? What were the quote unquote Goldilocks zone magic that made things come together?
Well, I think that there were some iterations of Parks that tried to do social networks, and those didn't necessarily work out. I think more importantly, they're like, take yourself back like 2 years in this space, like not a lot was working. 2 years ago, Ether was at like $80, down from its high of like 1,200, and people were like very skeptical that it was going to come back. I remember watching an interview with Fred Wilson from USV, just complaining about the Ethereum Foundation and what they were doing and making all these mistakes, and everyone was like sort of questioning whether we'd be able to make it through, and whether things would work. And those were like basic things, like DeFi didn't exist. Like DeFi was like invented around that time, and so there wasn't like a Uniswap or anything like that that was really working in a kind of obvious like way with product market fit. So, I mean, I don't think anybody would really have wanted to build like a Web3 like mirror product at that time. I think it just would have been like too far out. Like rather just like focus on DeFi maybe, and see if that works. That would be my take on it. I just think people weren't really thinking about it. Even NFTs, and NFT like that really surprised everyone. I think over the last year, I don't think people really thought that it was going to break out the way that it did. And I can say that having worked with a lot of people who are already big in NFTs now. When Foundation started, for example, like it wasn't an NFT platform. They were actually doing like real world objects that you bought on a bonding curve, because the primitives were around DeFi, not around NFTs, and they were amazing in that they pivoted to something just before it exploded. But NFTs were not like the big thing that they are today, and people didn't necessarily think that they would be, I would say. So we just say, yeah, I mean, we're just new things emerged, and like it was hard to predict that it would be possible.
Yeah, for sure. And then here is sort of like a more philosophical question, but how does the team approach the question of NFT durability philosophically and practically? Where are people in the space getting this wrong today? Love to hear both of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a huge issue. And like when I was just before Mirror, I was thinking about this, and I thought that the NFT like platform needed to be on Arweave, because it's so hard to try and make NFTs that had like guaranteed token URIs, or like the underlying like image, whether that would actually be something that persisted forever. It's hard to do. I think it is recoverable. So if you do have an NFT that's linked to something that ends up dying, so for example, if the server that renders all of your content goes away, I think you can still wrap the NFT. So you can have like kind of a wrapping function that solves that problem. It's much better if you are able to at least do a hash of the content, or store the content on another platform and then include a link to that in the contract. So that's like the kind of thing that we do at Mirror with our NFTs, is at least store some verifiable information, so that if you do need to wrap it in the future because the underlying API goes away, you can, for example, if IPFS goes away or Arweave or anything like that, you can still match the hash of the content with the online, with the NFT, and then wrap the whole token, and it can sort of keep its provenance.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point because I think what a lot of people don't realize is that with a lot of NFT art, the art actually isn't like on the blockchain as much as I don't know how to explain it from a technical perspective, but can you explain like that whole phenomenon? And I guess like nobody really cares clearly because people are still buying these NFTs and just assuming that, they're gonna get to keep it forever, but that's not actually the case, right, Graham?
Yeah, so some of it is, which is really cool to see that. Like that is, I love when people do that. And Uniswap did this when you provide liquidity to your Uniswap pool, you get an NFT, and that NFT actually has its content, like the graphic for it is an SVG that is stored in the contract, and so everything that you need resides within the world of Ethereum. It's all there on that blockchain. It doesn't reach out into the external world and refer to something that is outside of that like closed loop. So that's beautiful to see. For the most part, it's impossible, to do that when you have very like sophisticated like images. So most artworks, just you wouldn't be able to do that, and so it needs to refer to something that lives outside of Ethereum, and that's where you kind of get this issue, because all of your Ethereum contracts are immutable, but that's not necessarily true of the image that you store, depending on where you store it. And so there are some protocols for eternal file storage. For example, Arweave is one, and IPFS is another, but they're still very early and they're not particularly proven. And so we'll have to see how those mature over time. But a lot of people are just storing the images on S3, which is Amazon's file storage system, which is quite dangerous, because if you don't pay that S3 bill every month, that image is going to go away, and the token might be sort of compromised because of that.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty crazy thing that a lot of people don't realize, or maybe realize and just don't care about because they're riding the hype and just excited to be in the space. But thanks for explaining that. And then yeah, and then Patrick.
Yeah, to your point, before I forget, so I think that's exactly right. Where it's like many times people just don't care, don't mind, because there's other use cases. And like one way I've heard it explained that I really like is like there's like three types of NFTs. One is there's like a fully centralized NFT where no information lives on a public blockchain. And like for example, that's something like NBA Top Shot. That's just basically like a file that lives on their server. And then second type of NFT is like a pointer where there's certain information. There's like, yeah, an event happened on chain. There's like some record of it, but the actual artwork itself, the actual file lives on, yeah, some other remote server somewhere. So that's the second one, the pointers. And then third is like fully on chain. And that's what Graham was talking about with, yeah, something like Uniswap, or even more generative projects like art blocks. all of those are basically just like contracts, solidity contracts, and they use these different type of compression methods for ways of storing lots of data and all this crazy stuff. And I think that's super interesting. But for example, with Top Shot, it's a the real benefit for most people is just trading and flipping them or just showing them and holding on to them for a bit. And for certain things, it's kind of like blockchains themselves. It's like Bitcoin is great. It's the most decentralized blockchain, but it's not as expressive. It doesn't have as much flexibility. And I view like these different like storage techniques. It's the same ways that over time it'll get easier to be more expressive with like fully on-chain art, but it's kind of you got to make trade-offs. And if you want to be more expressive, if you want general purpose use cases, you use a blockchain like Ethereum. You use a combination of on-chain plus off-chain. But I think over time, yeah, the strong form of this technology is going to be fully on-chain art or like some variation of that.
Yeah, for sure. And then bouncing back to the original question too, Patrick, I'd love to get your views on like how you view, this question of NFT durability. It is going up and down. We had this like crazy NFT hype cycle in the beginning of this year, and then it seemed to die down for a bit. And then here we are back in it again. How do you like view the durability of NFTs long term?
Yeah, I think long term they're definitely a very, very important primitive. And I think right now it's people are memeing it because it's like, oh, it's a JPEG. But I think that the important thing is that it's like this new type. It's like digital property rights is one way people have explained it. It's like this file format that now has value encoded in it, and you can share it globally. And so I think just like the underlying technology and the new properties that it has and the new things that it enables, I think over the long term, they're going to win out. And once things get easier around gas fees, around onboarding, around integrating with different products. But I think in the short, medium term, yeah, it's definitely going to be cyclical, like most things. That's kind of the traditional path of any new technology is people get too excited about it, we over financialize it. People want to be people are quick flippers. They're just in and out and just want to make money and they're not here for the long term. But with every cycle, it brings in more interest, it brings more entrepreneurs, brings more engineers, brings more investors that are legitimate and end up staying for the long term and building on top of all the infrastructure that was laid down in the previous phase. And so I think over the long, there's definitely going to be cycles, bumps up and down. But I think that medium to long term, I think just it's a new type of file format for the internet.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like the main thing that has helped it to grow so much is really like the community that people have been able to build around these NFT projects and like the social signaling that you're able to do when you have a crypto punk as your Twitter profile pic that automatically signals something to everybody that follows you or everybody else on Twitter about you without them knowing anything about you. So I think those are really the most powerful things, at least the way that I see it. And then, okay, these next two questions, I'm going to combine it for the sake of time. So essentially what people want to know is there are, sort of two sides of this. Of how to use Mirror. You can either build a project on Mirror or you can sort of use it as a writing platform and share your writings with people. And so from the project standpoint, what are some projects that you guys are most excited to see built on top of Mirror by third parties that we haven't seen yet? And then from the content standpoint, people want to know, will a platform like Mirror allow writers more freedom and less reliance on clickbait? And how will this change the type of content that we see produced?
In terms of third party, I can do the third party tools one. And so one thing that constantly hearing is discovery, wanting easier ways to find what's trending or what's latest or what's featured or what do other people like. So I think that's one massive, massive area that we'd love to either see third parties build, us work with them, or whatever it ends up looking like. And I think that they could do. I think the crypto, the traditional way, the Web2 way, is you have a bunch of data, you put it into this algorithm, machine learning algorithm, you run a bunch of experiments and see, okay, what keeps people the most engaged or whatever metric you're trying to optimize, and then you ship the algorithm to production, and then there you go. And it's a very top-down, centralized process. But of course, the crypto native way is something that looks more like Right Race, where you have this token, you have this way to stake your tokens on certain content, run certain publications. And then if you want to make it really interesting, you could have like a pool, a prize pool each week or each month. And then the top 10 people each week, each month, they get to split the prize pool or they get it in varying degrees. And so I think things like that will be really interesting. And Graeme talks about it as a game. And I really like that framing of, yeah, this really is, we're applying game mechanics with money to all sorts of online media and content formats, whether it's writing, whether it's producing videos, whether it's creating NFTs. And I think creating these game-like formats with tokens is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot more gamification in everything. And I think people are finally realizing the power of gamification and how effective that is in engaging, everybody, the normies too. Graham, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, blockchain is for games. It's kind of this like little catchphrase that kind of like landed in my head like maybe 3 years ago, because I realized, I think from my experience at Newmar, maybe just it sat with me, that the things that work well in the space are games, and everything that tries to be something else kind of like doesn't work. Maybe that goes back to Trent's question about like why there wasn't an earlier mirror. Well, it's like things that aren't games like just tend not to work that well. And I remember having like a whole list of like, these are the things that work, these are the things that don't work, and the things that work were always just like fun. And there were games, and like, what is a game? Google is not a game. Google is like an information service. You go there and you're just trying to find something. Whereas like, Bitcoin is an accumulation game, like a wealth accumulation game. Those are just like different things. And so, yeah, I think the idea of like building these like collaborative games you can build on each other, and make like really complex things. DeFi is kind of this like yield farming, right? Like yield farming is a game, right? It's not really like a bank account. It's yield farming. Like that's the frame that actually resonated with people. And then, building these like profile picture communities. I mean, it is kind of like a game of like which tribe is like the best. And so I think as long as things are games, like they tend to work in this space. And I would just, recommend people think about that. It's even part of like I think about it as like the founding myth of Ethereum is that Vitalik was like, playing this game and then the rules changed on him, right? Like, I don't know if you know this, but this is like the myth, whether it's true or not, I'm not sure. But he was really frustrated that the company could like take away his avatar that he had built up over time. And so he went and like was like, I'm going to build this like other thing where people can't change the rules, and it's like immutable contracts. That's kind of like the founding myth to me. And so I think of it as, continuation from that. It is a gaming platform. And we need to build like cool games, and games don't have to be trivial, right? Like some of the most important things, like if you read that book, Infinite Games, the point of that is that, we want to build long lasting games with each other that are collaborative. And that actually gives us a lot of meaning. And so like we're like humans are kind of like game playing creatures and creating creatures, and DAOs are like basically ways to like create games.
Yeah, and then what are your thoughts on the content piece? Like, have you seen that the content on Mirror has been stronger than content that you would find on, say, Medium or another blogging platform?
Yeah, it's like really early to say that, and I think it would be like biased just by like the right race, like the quality of writers who get into there. So definitely, I mean, obviously the average is going to be a lot higher than the average on Medium, but that doesn't necessarily mean that like the incentives are what created that. I think that in the future, I would love to say that. Yeah, the writers who post content on Mirror have a lot more tools, economic tools that allow them to fund their research. For example, we had one writer, Emily Cole, who funded a book on Mirror. She raised, I think, $90,000, and then she went to go write a new book, and she was already a novelist, and so she's writing her next book, and people really wanted to be part of that. Similarly with the Ethereum film Infinite Gardens, like they raised $1 million, I think, to go do a film. So it's quite clear that you can fund your writing through this process, and you don't have to do clickbait, and you don't have to do ads. You can be a quality writer, and so I think that's the story that I hope plays out for sure. It's still very early. So.
It is. It definitely is. Personally, from what I've seen, definitely higher level of content that I've seen on Mirror as opposed to any other publication. And even for me personally, like I feel a lot more pressure to like be more thoughtful in what I publish on Mirror than on, like Medium, for instance, which is probably like a big part of the reason why I haven't published very much yet on Mirror, because I just feel so much more pressure there. But I think that's a good thing, because that, I think that's an ultimate win-win for everybody, for consumers, for writers, for everybody. All right. Well, typically we like to end every episode with a segment called Explain Your Tweet, but in the interest of time, you have both escaped this. So let's just wrap it up. If you have any final thoughts, feel free to share. Otherwise, just go ahead and share how people can get a hold of you personally if they'd like to. And then also for people who are interested in learning more about Mirror or maybe getting on the platform and crowdfunding something or writing something, what is the best way for them to do so?
Yeah, I think like Twitter is probably like the way that most people in the space to communicate. So I'm Strange Chances on Twitter, and g@mirror.xyz if you want to email me, and g.mirror.xyz if you want to connect with me or whatever on Mirror itself.
Yep, same here. On Twitter, Patrick X Rivera, and then p@mirror.xyz, and then p.mirror.xyz. And then to learn more about Mirror, you can go to their homepage, mirror.xyz, and then there you get some information on Right Race, airdrop, and then also, ideally, next couple of weeks, launch a new landing page with more info on Mirror.
Awesome. Can't wait. Thank you both so much for taking the time and coming on here. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And we will be back again soon with another episode of the Unstoppable Podcast.